The question hung in the air, heavy and unyielding, like a storm cloud refusing to break. I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest, as if his words had unlocked something deep within me, something I'd tried so hard to bury. The truth. It was a dangerous word, one that carried weight far beyond its simple syllables. And yet, there it was sitting between us like an uninvited guest. I don't know, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. But I did know. Of course I knew. How could I not? Our parents' marriage hadn't just ended. It had imploded, leaving behind shards of secrets and lies that neither of us had fully confronted. For years, I'd told myself it wasn't my business, that their mistakes were theirs alone to carry. But now, with Alex sitting across from me, his eyes searching mine for answers I wasn't sure I had, I realized how wrong I'd been. Their choices weren't just theirs. They belonged to us too, to the fractured family we'd become. Alex leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tightly together. I can't stop thinking about it, he admitted, his tone raw with emotion. All those fights, the things they never said. Do you think they even loved each other? His question caught me off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because it mirrored my own doubts. Love, or what passed for it, had always been complicated in our house. My mother's quiet resignation, his father's simmering anger. Even as a child, I'd sensed the cracks beneath the surface, though I'd never dared to look too closely. Now, with Alex here, forcing me to confront the past, those cracks felt wider than ever. They must have, I said hesitantly, though the words tasted bitter on my tongue. Why else would they have stayed together as long as they did? Alex shook his head, his expression skeptical. People stay together for lots of reasons. Doesn't mean it was real. His cynicism stung, not because I disagreed, but because it hit too close to home. Wasn't that what I feared most? That the foundation of everything I thought I understood about love and family was built on sand, destined to crumble under the slightest pressure? For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain continued to lash against the windows, its rhythm filling the silence between us. Then, almost instinctively, Alex reached out, his hand brushing mine. The contact was fleeting, accidental even, but it sent a jolt through me, a spark I couldn't ignore. Do you ever wonder, he began, his voice softer now, if any of this is fixable? If we could, I don't know, start over? Start over. The idea seemed impossible, laughable even. Too much time had passed, too many wounds left unhealed. And yet, as I looked at him, the vulnerability in his gaze, the tension in his shoulders, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe starting over didn't mean erasing the past. Maybe it meant finding a way to move forward together. I don't know. I admitted, my voice trembling slightly, but maybe we owe it to ourselves to try. Alex nodded, his grip tightening around mine. For the first time since he'd arrived, the awkwardness between us began to fade, replaced by something deeper, more profound. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. A fragile, tentative step toward understanding not just what had happened to our family, but what might still be possible for us. As the night wore on, the conversation shifted, growing lighter, easier. We talked about small things, books we'd read, places we'd been, memories we'd forgotten we shared. But beneath the surface, the weight of what we'd started remained, lingering like the echo of thunder after a storm. Whatever lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain. Inviting Alex into my home had changed everything. Whether for better or worse, only time would tell. The attic was a time capsule of forgotten memories, each dusty corner holding fragments of a past we thought we understood. At first, it felt almost playful, like solving a mystery together. We sifted through old photo albums, their pages brittle with age, and laughed at snapshots of our younger selves. But as we dug deeper, the tone shifted. Faded letters tucked inside books revealed secrets we weren't prepared for. Arguments between our parents that had festered into silence, promises broken long before Alex and I were old enough to notice. "This isn't what they told us," Alex muttered one evening, his voice heavy with disbelief. He held up a letter written in my mother's handwriting, a plea for forgiveness addressed to his father. The words were raw, desperate, and achingly human. It made them seem less like the untouchable figures who raised us and more like flawed people trying and failing to hold everything together. I nodded, unable to speak. My throat tightened as I stared at the page, the ink smudged in places where tears must have fallen. "They lied to us," I whispered finally. "Or maybe they just didn't want us to know how hard it really was." Alex set the letter down carefully, his hands trembling slightly. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he reached out, brushing his fingers against mine. The touch was fleeting but electric, sending a jolt through me that I couldn't ignore. I pulled my hand away quickly, pretending to adjust the stack of papers on my lap, but the spark lingered, an unspoken acknowledgement of something shifting between us. Late at night, after hours spent piecing together scraps of truth, we'd retreat to the living room. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the walls. These moments felt sacred, as if the rest of the world had faded away, leaving only the two of us. Alex would recount stories from his childhood, things I hadn't heard before, details he'd kept locked away. His laughter during these conversations felt foreign yet comforting, a reminder of the bond we might have shared if circumstances had been different. But beneath the camaraderie lay an undercurrent I couldn't shake. There was heat in his gaze when he thought I wasn't looking, a tension in the air whenever our hands accidentally brushed while reaching for the same book or passing a cup of tea. Each accidental touch sent my pulse racing, though I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just the intensity of uncovering painful truths. One night, as we sat side by side on the couch, Alex turned to me suddenly. "Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if things had gone differently?" he asked, his voice low and hesitant. "What do you mean?" I replied, though I already knew. He hesitated, his eyes searching mine. "If they hadn't split up, if we'd grown up together instead of apart, do you think we'd be closer?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications neither of us dared to voice. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "Maybe," I said softly, avoiding his gaze. "But some things can't change, no matter how much we wish they could." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The fire popped loudly, breaking the silence. When I finally looked up, Alex was still watching me, his expression unreadable but charged with emotion. It wasn't just familial loyalty binding us anymore. Something deeper, more complicated, was taking root, and though I tried to push it aside, I couldn't deny the spark igniting between us. As the days passed, the line between curiosity and connection blurred. Every revelation about our parents' fractured marriage seemed to draw us closer, forcing us to confront not only their mistakes but also the emotions we'd buried within ourselves. And though fear gnawed at the edges of my mind, warning me to tread carefully, I found myself leaning into the warmth of Alex's presence, unwilling or perhaps unable to resist the pull any longer. The storm outside mirrored the chaos brewing within me, each crash of thunder echoing the turmoil in my chest. The candles flickered erratically, their light casting jagged shadows on the walls that seemed to dance with our unspoken tension. I could feel Alex's presence like a magnet pulling me closer, even as my mind screamed at me to pull away. "You're staring," he said softly, his tone teasing but laced with something deeper, something I couldn't quite name. "So are you?" I shot back, my voice trembling despite my attempt to sound casual. My pulse quickened when his hand brushed against mine, sending a jolt through me that I couldn't ignore. It was electric, intoxicating, and terrifying. "Maybe I can't help it," he murmured, leaning closer. His eyes locked onto mine, searching for something I wasn't sure I could give him. But before I could think or resist, his lips met mine. The kiss was urgent, desperate, filled with all the longing we'd been trying so hard to suppress. For a fleeting moment, I let myself sink into it, losing myself in the warmth of his touch. The world around us faded. The storm, the secrets, the boundaries, all of it dissolved into nothingness. All that existed was the two of us, caught in a moment neither of us had planned, but both of us craved. But reality came crashing back far too soon. As his lips lingered on mine, guilt surged through me like a tidal wave, dragging me under. This wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous. He was my stepbrother, and no matter how much we tried to rationalize it, this crossed every line we'd ever been taught not to cross. I pulled away abruptly, my breath coming in shallow gasps. "This is wrong," I whispered, my voice shaking. Alex didn't move, his gaze steady on mine. "Is it?" he countered, his expression unreadable. "Or is it just complicated?" Complicated didn't even begin to cover it. Every instinct told me to put distance between us, to shut this down before it spiraled further out of control. Yet, as I looked at him, the vulnerability in his eyes, the way his hand still hovered near mine, I couldn't bring myself to regret what had just happened. "It doesn't matter if it's complicated," I said finally, my voice barely audible. "It's still wrong." "Wrong according to who?" Alex asked, his tone sharper now, almost defensive. "Our parents? Society? What about what we feel?" His words struck a chord deep within me, one I'd been trying desperately to ignore. What do we feel? Was it love? Lust? A twisted mix of both, fueled by years of unresolved tension and shared pain? I didn't know. And maybe that was the scariest part. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice cracking slightly. "But this, whatever it is, it's going to destroy us if we let it." Alex reached for my hand again, his grip firm yet gentle. "Or maybe it'll save us," he said quietly. "Maybe this is exactly what we've been missing." His words hung in the air, heavy and loaded with possibility. Part of me wanted to believe him, to believe that what we felt could somehow transcend the boundaries we'd always known. But another part of me, the rational, fearful part, knew better. This wasn't just a risk, it was a gamble with stakes higher than either of us fully understood. Yet, as the storm raged on outside and the candlelight flickered between us, I realized something. No matter how wrong it was, I couldn't walk away. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And that scared me more than anything. The first time it happened, I told myself it was nothing, just kids messing around, maybe someone angry about a noise complaint or a boundary dispute. But when I picked up the rock and unfolded the note, its jagged handwriting scrawled across the page like a warning, I felt a chill run down my spine. "You shouldn't dig too deep." "What does that even mean?" Alex asked, his voice low as he stood beside me, staring at the shattered glass on the living room floor. "I don't know," I admitted, though deep down I suspected. Our late-night excavations into our parents' past had stirred something we weren't prepared for. Someone didn't want us to keep going. At first, we tried to brush it off. Vandalism wasn't unheard of in this part of town, and maybe the note was just meant to scare us. But then came the phone calls, always in the dead of night, always silent except for faint breathing on the other end. And after that, the slashed tires. By the time I noticed the shadow lingering outside our window one evening, fear had taken root inside me, twisting tighter with each passing day. "We can't stay here," I said one night, pacing the length of the kitchen while Alex leaned against the counter, his arms crossed over his chest. "And go where?" he shot back, though there was no anger in his tone, only exhaustion. "Whoever this is knows who we are, Sarah. Running won't fix anything." He was right, but that didn't make the situation any less suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of movement outside the curtains sent my heart racing. I started sleeping less, jumping at every sound. It was maddening, feeling so powerless. But if the threats were meant to drive us apart, they had the opposite effect. In those moments of vulnerability, Alex became my anchor, the steady presence I didn't realize I needed. When I woke up shaking from nightmares, he was there, sitting on the edge of my bed, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "It's okay," he'd murmur, his voice calm despite the storm raging around us. "We'll get through this." His confidence gave me strength, even when logic screamed that we were outmatched. One night, after finding another cryptic message taped to the front door, "Stop before it's too late," I broke down, tears streaming down my face as I sank onto the couch. Alex knelt in front of me, his hands gripping mine tightly. "This isn't your fault," he said firmly, his gaze unwavering. "Whatever secrets they left behind, whatever mess they created, it's not on you. We're in this together, no matter what." His words hit me like a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge of panic. For the first time since the threats began, I let myself lean into him, seeking comfort in the warmth of his embrace. The line between familial loyalty and something deeper blurred further with every passing moment. Each stolen glance, each fleeting touch carried the weight of unspoken promises, promises neither of us dared to voice aloud. Were we fighting for survival, or for something more? As the danger escalated, so did the tension between us. Late one night, after hearing footsteps circling the house, Alex grabbed my arm and pulled me close, his breath warm against my ear. "Stay near me," he whispered urgently. "Don't leave my side." I nodded, my pulse quickening, not just from fear, but from the intensity of his proximity. His hand lingered on my waist longer than necessary, and for a moment, all I could focus on was the heat radiating from his touch. "Alex," I started, but he cut me off with a shake of his head. "Not now," he said quietly, though his eyes betrayed the turmoil beneath his composed exterior. Later, as we sat huddled together in the dim light of the living room, listening for any sign of movement outside, I realized how much had changed between us. The fear that once pushed us apart now bound us closer, weaving threads of trust, and something else, into the fragile fabric of our relationship. Whatever lay ahead, we would face it together. Not because we had a choice, but because we couldn't imagine doing it any other way. The woods behind the house had always been a place of quiet refuge for me, but now they felt alive with tension, every rustling leaf and snapping twig amplifying the weight of what was happening. Alex and I stood side by side, our breaths visible in the cold night air as the man we once trusted, a family friend who'd been a fixture in both our lives, paced in front of us like a caged animal. His eyes darted wildly between us, his desperation palpable. "You don't understand," he spat, his voice trembling with panic. "If the truth comes out, everything falls apart. Your parents' reputations, your family's legacy, it'll all be ruined." His words hit me like a slap, not because they were new, but because they underscored how deeply entrenched the lies had become. For years, this man had helped bury the secrets that tore our families apart, protecting himself and others at the cost of honesty. And now, faced with exposure, he was willing to do anything to keep those secrets buried, even harm us. But Alex didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of me, his body a shield against whatever threat loomed. The gesture startled me, not just because it was protective, but because it felt instinctual, as if he'd always known exactly where he stood when it came to me. "The truth is all that matters," Alex said firmly, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "No matter how painful." For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The man hesitated, his wild eyes narrowing as if searching for some way to argue back. But there was no argument left. He knew we were right, and more importantly, he knew we weren't going to back down. When the distant sound of sirens pierced the silence, the man's resolve crumbled completely. He took a step back, his shoulders slumping in defeat before turning and bolting into the darkness. But he didn't get far. Moments later, the police arrived, their flashlights slicing through the trees as they closed in on him. As they led him away, handcuffed and muttering under his breath, I felt a wave of relief crash over me so powerful it nearly brought me to my knees. But the relief was short-lived. As the officer secured the scene and asked us questions, Alex stayed close, his presence grounding me even as my mind raced with everything we'd uncovered. When the last car finally disappeared down the driveway, leaving us alone in the stillness of the night, an eerie quiet settled over the woods. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, charged with unspoken emotions and unanswered questions. Now, standing here in the aftermath, I realized how much had changed between us. We weren't the same people who had started digging into our parents' past. Those first few days together, tiptoeing around each other, felt like a lifetime ago. Now, Alex wasn't just my stepbrother. He was my partner, someone willing to risk everything to protect me. And yet, as the adrenaline faded and reality set in, the hardest question remained. What next? Alex turned to me, then, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice tinged with concern. I nodded, though the movement felt mechanical. "Yeah, are you?" He hesitated, his gaze flickering over my face as if trying to gauge whether I was telling the truth. Finally, he nodded too. "I think so." We stood there for a long moment, neither of us speaking, the enormity of what we'd been through hanging between us like a storm cloud. But beneath the uncertainty, something else lingered, something deeper, more complicated. "What happens now?" I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Alex exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know," he admitted, "but whatever it is, we'll figure it out. Together." His words sent a jolt through me, both comforting and terrifying. Together. The idea should have felt impossible, given everything we'd uncovered about our families, about ourselves. But standing here in the shadow of the truth, I couldn't imagine facing the future any other way. "Okay," I said softly, my voice steadier than I expected. "Together." As we walked back toward the house, the weight of the night pressing down on us, I realized something. While the road ahead would undoubtedly be fraught with challenges, we had already proven that we could face them head-on as long as we did it side by side. Whatever came next, we would survive it, not because we had to, but because we chose to. The morning air was crisp, carrying with it the faint scent of dew-kissed grass and the promise of a new day. But as we sat there on the porch, side by side yet worlds apart in our thoughts, I couldn't shake the weight of everything that had brought us to this moment. The confrontation with the assailant felt like both a resolution and a beginning, a closing of one chapter but an opening into something far more complicated. "I don't know what happens now," I admitted finally, my voice barely above a whisper. The words tumbled out before I could stop them, breaking the fragile silence between us. It wasn't just uncertainty I was voicing, it was fear. Fear of what lay ahead, of the choices we'd have to make, of the consequences we might not be ready to face. Alex turned his head slightly, his gaze meeting mine. His eyes were soft, searching, as if trying to find answers written somewhere deep within me. "Neither do I," he said after a pause, his tone tinged with vulnerability. "But I know one thing, I don't want to lose you again." His words hit me like a wave, pulling me under their current. They echoed my own thoughts so perfectly it was almost unsettling. For all the chaos we'd endured, the secrets, the threats, the truths that refused to stay buried, it was clear that Alex had become something I hadn't realized I needed until now. A constant, a tether holding me steady when everything else threatened to pull me under. Yet, even as relief washed over me, reality pressed down hard. Pursuing this connection, nurturing it wouldn't be easy. Society had rules, unspoken ones, rigid ones, and we were about to break every single one of them. Our families, fractured as they already were, would likely never understand. And then there was the guilt lingering like a shadow at the edges of my mind, reminding me how wrong this should feel. But as I looked at him, the way the sunlight caught the faint stubble on his jaw, the way his hand hovered near mine as if drawn magnetically, I couldn't deny the truth staring back at me. This wasn't just attraction or comfort or familiarity. It was deeper than that, rooted in years of shared history and pain and survival. Whatever this was, it was worth fighting for. "We'll take it slow," I said finally, the words coming out steadier than I expected. My voice carried a resolve I didn't fully feel yet, but saying it aloud made it real somehow. One step at a time. Alex nodded slowly, his fingers brushing against mine before intertwining them gently. "Together," he murmured, his voice firm despite the uncertainty still lingering between us. The simplicity of his response sent a shiver through me, equal parts hope and dread. Together. It sounded so easy, so natural, but I knew better. Every step forward would come with its own set of challenges, its own battles to fight, not just against the world outside, but within ourselves. Could we really navigate this without losing who we were, without hurting each other in ways we couldn't come back from? For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The world around us seemed to fade away. The chirping birds, the rustling leaves, the distant hum of cars passing by. All of it dulled compared to the quiet intensity stretching between us. Finally, Alex broke the silence. "It won't be easy," he said, his tone measured but laced with determination. "People will talk. They'll judge. Maybe even hate us for this." "I know," I replied softly, my grip tightening around his hand. "But maybe we don't owe them anything. Not anymore." His lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes, but warmed something inside me nonetheless. "No," he agreed, "we don't." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting golden light across the yard, I allowed myself to believe for the first time that perhaps love didn't always follow logic, that some bonds transcended boundaries because they were forged in fire, tested by time, and strengthened by survival. What Alex and I shared wasn't conventional, but it was ours. And maybe that was enough. For now, at least, it had to be. Love isn't always simple or safe. Sometimes it's messy and complicated and terrifying. But as Alex and I stood on the precipice of an uncertain future, I realized something profound. Some connections transcend logic. They defy explanation because they're rooted in something deeper, something primal, unshakable, and real. Our bond wasn't just about blood or shared history. It was about survival, trust, and the quiet understanding that we'd been through hell together and come out stronger for it. Our past had been shadowed by secrets, lies, and pain, so much pain that sometimes I wondered how either of us had survived. Yet those very shadows had forged a bond between us that felt almost indestructible. The same wounds that could have torn us apart instead became the foundation of something neither of us could deny. It wasn't easy. There were moments when guilt threatened to consume me, when fear whispered cruel truths about what others might think if they ever knew. But then there were moments like this, quiet, tender moments where Alex's presence alone reminded me why we couldn't walk away from each other. Together, we were learning to heal, not perfectly, not all at once, but slowly, deliberately. We faced the darkness head-on, not just the secrets our parents had buried, but the ones within ourselves. The fear of being discovered, the weight of societal judgment, the gnawing doubt that maybe we were wrong to feel this way. It was all still there, lurking in the corners of our minds. But so was the light we'd found in each other. And that light, fragile as it sometimes felt, gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. One evening, as we sat side by side on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and pink, Alex spoke softly. "Do you ever wonder if we'll regret this? Someday." I turned to look at him, his profile illuminated by the fading light. For a moment, I let myself imagine a life without him, a life where we hadn't crossed that line, where we remained bound only by familial ties. The thought hollowed me. Maybe, I admitted finally, but even if we do, I don't think I'd change anything. He glanced at me then, his eyes searching mine as if trying to gauge whether I meant it. You wouldn't. No, I said firmly, my voice steadying with conviction. Because despite everything, the fear, the guilt, the risks, you've given me something I didn't think I'd ever find. Strength, hope, a reason to keep going, even when it feels impossible. His hand found mine, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that had become second nature. Same here, he murmured. Whatever happens next, I know one thing for sure. I'm not letting go of you. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away, smiling faintly. In that moment, I understood what love truly meant, not perfection, not safety, but resilience. Love was choosing each other every single day, no matter how hard it got. Love was finding beauty in the broken pieces and building something new from the wreckage. As night fell around us, wrapping the world in its quiet embrace, I leaned into Alex, resting my head against his shoulder. Together, we watched the stars appear one by one, tiny pinpricks of light piercing the vast darkness above. It felt symbolic somehow, a reminder that even in the deepest shadows, light could still shine through. Our journey was far from over, and the road ahead would undoubtedly be fraught with challenges. But as long as we faced them together, as long as we held on to the connection that defied logic and convention, I knew we'd be okay. Because some bonds aren't meant to break. Some loves are worth fighting for. And ours was undeniable.